Have you ever stopped to think if there's more than one way to be a good person? For, centuries, Western philosophy has pretty much given us one big answer. But what if that answer was missing something? What if it was incomplete? Today we are diving deep into a huge conflict in how we think about morality. It's a debate that might start in some dusty philosophy books, but believe me, it has massive consequences for how we build our world, from our own relationships all the way up to international peace.
So at the very heart of all this, you've got a clash between two completely different ways of thinking. On one side, you have the ethics of justice. This is the classic approach, the one we're all kind of taught. It's all about universal rules, cold hard reason, being impartial, and focusing on individual rights. But then on the other side, you've got the ethics of care. And this one says, hang on, what about our relationships? What about the specific context? What about empathy and our responsibility to each other? You can see right away, these are two very, very different starting points for figuring out what's right and what's wrong.
All right, so let's unpack the reigning champion first, the ethics of justice. You got to understand, this framework has been the absolute bedrock of Western moral and political thought for hundreds and hundreds of years.
I mean, this system was built by some real intellectual heavyweights. You're talking about Immanuel Kant and his focus on universal duties, Jeremy Bentham and his famous greatest good for the greatest number, and more recently, John Rawls and his ideas about a fair social contract. As different as they were all chasing the same thing, impartial, one-size-fits-all rules for morality.
But then, here comes the critique that just changed everything. In the 1970s, feminist thinkers took a hard look at this whole tradition and basically said, hold on a second, this isn't universal at all. They pointed out a deep-seated bias they called phallocentrism. It's a big word, but the idea is simple. It's a system where the male point of view is treated as the default, the universal norm, while the female perspective gets defined as something different, something other.
And what that did, according to these critics, was create a really clear hierarchy. You see, in this way of thinking, things like man, mind, and reason were seen as the positive, the primary forces. And on the flip side, woman, body, and passion were sort of coded as negative, secondary, or, again, the other. So the key takeaway here is that the system wasn't neutral at all. It had a value judgment baked right into it from the start.
But this critique wasn't just about knocking down the old system. No, it was about proposing a really powerful alternative. And this gave rise to a totally revolutionary way of thinking about what it means to be good.
This idea, which was so powerfully laid out by the psychologist Carol Gilligan, was a total game changer. She argued that because of different social experiences, especially around things like caregiving and relationships, women often develop a completely distinct moral perspective. She called it a different moral voice, and it was a voice that the traditional models had just completely ignored.
So what is this voice actually saying? Well, the ethics of care isn't about abstract theory. It's rooted in the real, messy experiences of our lives, things like motherhood, our friendships, our whole web of relationships. It really values things like caring and nurturance. And, this is key, it says the specific context of a situation is way more important than some abstract universal rule. It's not looking for one right answer for everybody. It's looking for a more differentiated one.
Okay, but as soon as this new theory came along, it raised a really, really important question. Are we just swapping one restrictive box for another?
Exactly. Is reason truly a male thing and care a female thing? I think we all know intuitively that reality is just way more complicated than that.
I mean, just look at the stereotypes versus what actually happens in the world. The old stereotype says men are the rational leaders and women are the nurturers. But then you have figures like Indira Gandhi, who literally led nations into war. Or think about spirituality, often stereotyped as a female thing, but in our crazy high-stress world, more and more men are drawn to it for balance. You see, these neat little boxes, they just fall apart under pressure.
The fancy philosophical term for this kind of thinking is essentialism, and it's the really problematic belief that everyone in a group, all women or all men, shares some kind of deep, unchangeable, natural essence. It's so dangerous because it completely erases individuality and just locks people into stereotypes. And a much more thoughtful approach tries to avoid this trap altogether.
So if we throw out this binary, then where do we go? The goal here isn't to have a big fight and pick a winner between justice and care. The real goal is to build something totally new, something that actually works for everyone.
And the path to get there seems to involve a few really clear steps. First, we just have to acknowledge that these different moral voices are real and they're valid. Second, and this is a big one, we have to consciously reject essentialism.
We have to stop sticking gender labels on human virtues like reason or care. And then finally, the ultimate goal is to create a new, truly universal ethic, one where these values aren't fighting each other, but can actually be shared and practiced by anybody.
And that's the vision, right? That's the world we're trying to build. One where our best qualities are finally entangled from our gender. A world where anyone is free to be rational, and anyone can be caring. Where anyone can be strong and anyone can be spiritual, without having to fit into some kind of outdated, restrictive box.
Now, you might be sitting there thinking, okay, this is all very interesting, but it feels a little abstract. But this philosophical debate has unbelievably high stakes for the real world, especially when you start talking about things like global conflict and peace.
And when you look at our current global climate, this stuff is not just an academic exercise. Far from it. These ideas are more urgent and more relevant right now than maybe ever before.
I mean, just look at the crises staring us in the face. The devastating war in Ukraine, the rising tensions between major world powers, that constant nagging threat of nuclear conflict, and, of course, the planetary crisis that really demands what you could call climate care. Every single one of these problems shows the limits of an ethic that's only based on abstract rules and power politics.
And this leads us to a really powerful, maybe even radical proposal. What if we took the ethics of care, borrowed it from its feminist origins, and purposefully made it a core principle at the highest levels of diplomacy and international relations? What would happen if we made care a central part of how nations deal with each other?
And that really leaves us with one final, big question to chew on. For centuries, we have built a world order based on strength, on rules, on strategic self-interest. But what if we've been missing half the equation this whole time? What if our most powerful foreign policy, our greatest tool for actually building a safer, more peaceful world, wasn't strength, but care?